I was halfway through my second slice of pumpkin pie when my brother leaned across the table and said, low enough for only me to hear. If you don't fix this, I swear, I'll make your life hell. The room buzzed with the warm lull of post-dinner chatter, clinking forks, and someone's kid crying in the other room. But all I could hear was that threat. And all I could think was, he really thought I was still the quiet one. The obedient one. I'm Claire, 31 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had a handle on family dysfunction. I was wrong. My grandfather's will changed everything. He died on a rainy Tuesday in October, the kind of wet chill that seeps into your skin and makes you wish you'd said more. I'd sat beside him that last week, holding his hand while the machines hummed, and promised to carry out his wishes. I didn't know then how heavy that promise would become. The reading of the will was held in the den of his old house, the one with the stone fireplace and the dented armchair he refused to replace. My brother, Adam, was late. As always. My mother had her arms crossed tight across her chest like she already knew she'd be disappointed. I was named the sole executor. More than that, I inherited the house, the business assets, and full control over the family trust. Adam got a handwritten letter and a framed photo. I thought he'd laugh it off. Shake his head, call it sentimental, and ask for a loan like he always did. Instead, he stood so fast his chair skidded back into the bookcase. He didn't say a word then. Just left. The first message came that night. You always were his favorite. Don't let it go to your head. I didn't respond. The second message, a day later, was longer. More venomous. A litany of reasons why I didn't deserve any of it, how I was selfish, cold, how I'd twisted our grandfather against him. None of it was true. But truth isn't what hurts the most. It's the rewriting of your life, the implication that love was transactional. That trust was a game I'd won unfairly. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I'd convinced myself he'd calm down. That was my mistake. Adam had always been charming when he wanted to be. He could spin a story in any room, make our mother laugh even when she was furious. At the dinner table, he played his part well, passing the rolls, complimenting the stuffing, helping our cousin carry plates. He waited until dessert to strike. You've turned everyone against me, he hissed, fork still in his hand. Do you really think this will end well for you? I didn't answer. Not then. But inside me, something hardened. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about the years I'd kept quiet, let things slide, played the peacekeeper while Adam set fires and walked away whistling. He always assumed I wouldn't fight back. And maybe he was right, once. But grief does strange things to people. And betrayal? Betrayal sharpens every dull edge you've tried to hide. After dinner, I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes like nothing had happened, while my mother hovered behind me, drying plates in silence. She hadn't said a word during Adam's little performance. That silence said more than anything else. When she finally spoke, it was in that tight, clipped voice I remembered from childhood. You should have split it with him. I kept my back to her. Let the water run hot over my hands. He's your brother, she added. I said, Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. You think that makes this easier? She snapped. No, I said quietly. I think it makes it necessary. The house was too quiet after she left. I stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of cinnamon and the faint ticking of the old clock above the stove. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the weight of what was coming next. Because what Adam didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already started protecting what my grandfather left me. And by the time they realized it, it would be too late. The first time I realized I was truly alone in that house, it wasn't when my mother left or when Adam threatened me. It was when I stood in the dark hallway and heard the floorboards creak under no one's weight but my own. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, my thoughts too loud. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of Thanksgiving, crumb-streaked plates, a folded napkin stained with cranberry sauce, and my grandfather's empty chair at the end of the table. The seat no one had taken that evening. I stared at it until the room faded into that early morning gray, when things feel more like memory than reality. I poured myself coffee and looked out over the backyard. He used to mow himself well into his 70s, refusing to hire someone, even when his knees ached. He used to joke that the mower helped him think. I remember him out there in cargo shorts and black socks, waving at me through the window as I did dishes during summer visits home from college. He never stopped working, not even when the doctors told him to slow down. He said slowing down meant giving up. And he didn't know how. That stubbornness, that integrity, had formed the backbone of who he was. He was strict but kind. Quiet but intentional. He never wasted time or words. Everything had weight, and he always kept his promises. Even the ones that made enemies of the people I was supposed to call family. The morning after Thanksgiving, I returned to the guest room to find a folded note on the bed. Not handwritten. Printed. From my mother. Short and to the point. She needed time. She hoped I would reconsider Adam's share. She suggested it would be easier if I made things right, for everyone's sake. The phrasing was careful. Like a lawyer had written it. Or someone who'd rehearsed their own detachment. I didn't reply. I packed my bag and drove back to the city with the radio off and the windows cracked, the cold air slicing through the silence like a reminder, stay awake. Stay sharp. That night, I reread my grandfather's will. Not just the legal version, but the notes he left in the margins of his older copies, the ones he made before he knew he'd be gone so soon. His handwriting was still strong in those earlier drafts. He underlined things. Circled words like protection, trust, and responsibility. I traced the ink with my fingers, feeling the weight of every line. It was never about punishing Adam. It was about shielding me. He had seen it coming. And I had chosen to ignore the signs for too long. The truth was, I'd spent years telling myself Adam would grow up. That he just needed time, or motivation, or the right failure to finally learn from. I believed in him the way a little sister does, even when the man standing in front of her no longer resembled the boy she once shared secrets with under blanket forts and summer thunderstorms. But the boy was gone. And in his place stood someone who had learned that charm could be a weapon, and that consequences could be outsourced to whoever was soft enough to carry them. That had been me. For years. But not anymore. I kept to myself the next week, working from home, avoiding calls. The only person I told everything to was Iris, my closest friend and the only one who truly understood how tangled things had become. We met in grad school. She was sharp in ways that cut through nonsense and kind in ways that made you believe you weren't crazy for feeling what you felt. She listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, she said, "Claire. You're not responsible for cleaning up their mess just because you used to." I nodded. But I couldn't shake the guilt. Not for keeping what was mine. But for knowing how much worse things were going to get before they got better. By the end of the second week, the calls started again. First from Adam, always from blocked numbers, always just long enough to remind me he hadn't gone anywhere. Then my mother. Then my aunt, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years but was suddenly interested in helping to mediate. They weren't asking. They were circling. And the more I said nothing, the louder they got. When the formal letter arrived, heavy cream cardstock, gold-embossed letterhead, I felt my stomach drop. Their lawyer's name printed at the top. A summons to a family mediation. A veiled warning cloaked in polite legalese. Not mandatory, but suggested. Not accusatory, but preemptive. My attendance would signal goodwill. I set it down without opening the second page. Then I opened my grandfather's safe. He had left me the combination on a folded napkin, hidden behind a loose board in the upstairs hallway. Like something out of a movie. I thought it was sentimental at the time. Now I understood, it was strategic. He knew what would happen. He knew they'd come after what he left. Inside the safe were original copies of business transfer documents, titles, deeds, and the trust agreement with my name on it. All filed, notarized, and airtight. And beneath those documents, an envelope with my name. Inside, a short note. I know this won't be easy. But you are not alone. Everything you need is here. You were always the one who listened. The one who learned. I trust you. H. I sat on the floor of that hallway for nearly an hour, letter in hand, documents spread around me. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. That weekend, I drove to the bank and met with the estate attorney my grandfather had appointed years before, one Adam never liked because he was too thorough. We reviewed every document, every clause, every lock on every account. Nothing could be undone without my signature. Then he asked me, almost gently, "Do you want to be proactive?" I didn't speak right away. Just watched the trees swaying outside his office window, brown leaves trembling in the late autumn light. "Yes," I said finally. "I think it's time I stopped being reactive." He nodded. "Then we'll prepare for what comes next." That night, I dreamed of my grandfather's voice. Not loud, not urgent. Just steady. Like it had always been. You don't have to shout to be strong. You just have to know when to stop backing down. I woke up before sunrise, calm in a way I hadn't been since the day he died. Because the storm had already started. But I wasn't standing in the rain anymore. I was building the shelter. And the next time Adam showed up, I'd be ready. Not to fight. But to end it. The first time I felt truly hunted was not in some dark alley or deserted street. It was in my inbox, subject lines like knives, sent from people who shared my blood. The emails came in waves. Thinly veiled threats wrapped in pleasantries. Subject lines like concern, urgent family matter, and time to talk. My mother's name appeared first. Then Adam. Then his girlfriend, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Her message was the worst, cloying, informal, and peppered with phrases like "what's best for everyone" and "surely you don't want things to escalate." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I poured myself into my routine like it was armor. I worked. I took long walks after dusk. I organized drawers that didn't need organizing. Anything to keep from thinking too hard, too long. Because I knew if I stopped moving, the gravity of it all would catch up and pin me down. The hardest part wasn't the legal pressure. I had control there. The documents were secure. The estate was locked down tighter than they realized. What haunted me was the emotional erosion. The slow peeling away of what I used to believe, about love, about loyalty, about what it meant to be family. The phone rang late one evening. I let it go to voicemail like I always did now. Then I saw the transcript pop up on my screen. It was my aunt's voice. Quieter than usual. "Your mother isn't sleeping. She says you've turned into someone else." That made me laugh. Quietly. Bitterly. I hadn't turned into someone else. I'd just stopped playing the role they cast me in. Still, guilt is a strange parasite. Even when you kill the host, it clings to the bones. I found myself questioning everything. Was I making this worse? Had I misjudged the line between holding my ground and burning the bridge? That doubt didn't last long. Because a week later, I came home to find the lock on my door scratched. Nothing was stolen. Nothing broken. Just the lock. Tampered with. Disturbed. A message, not a robbery. I changed the locks that night. Installed a security camera the next morning. And when the footage revealed nothing more than a shadow and the echo of someone retreating down the stairs, I felt a cold clarity settle into me. This wasn't about reason anymore. It was about control. And I had something they couldn't stand not to possess. The pressure didn't let up. If anything, it intensified. Subtle things. Friends calling to say they'd heard strange things from someone in your family. My credit card flagged for suspicious activity, an attempted purchase at a jewelry store I'd never set foot in. My name surfacing on a forum for business disputes, posted by an anonymous user claiming I'd committed fraud. I wasn't surprised when I traced the IP to an account associated with Adam. What did surprise me was how methodical he'd become. He wasn't acting on impulse. He was laying groundwork. Creating a narrative where I was unstable, greedy, undeserving. One that could be believed if someone squinted hard enough and didn't know better. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He said, "We're entering a new phase now." I replied, "Let's make sure I don't lose myself in it." Because that was the real danger. Not the money. Not the property. But the slow internal rot that comes from being made the villain in a story you didn't write. It wasn't just Adam's manipulation. It was my mother's silence. Her choice to watch from the edge and pretend she was powerless. That silence spoke louder than any of his words. I found myself craving something, anything, that reminded me who I used to be before this became a war. Before the cold calculations and legal meetings and the feeling that every move I made was being watched. So I drove to the edge of town, to the diner my grandfather used to take me to when I was a teenager. The same red vinyl booths. The same cracked pie case. I ordered his favorite, chicken pot pie and black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the rain beat on the glass. I remembered the way he'd sip his coffee slowly, no cream, and ask me questions like they were puzzles. What would you do if someone offered you something too good to be true? How do you measure the worth of a person? At the time, I thought it was just small talk. Now I knew better. He was giving me tools. Teaching me to think in layers. To prepare for storms long before the sky darkened. That night, I went home and pulled out the last letter he ever wrote to me. I'd kept it sealed since the funeral, afraid of what it might stir. My hands trembled as I slid the envelope open. Inside was a single sentence. "You were always the one who stayed calm when everyone else lost their head." I read it 5 times. Then I lit a candle, turned off my phone, and sat in the quiet. Not waiting. Just still. Because I realized something. Adam's power only existed in motion, in reaction, in chaos, in noise. But mine? Mine lived in silence. In stillness. In the slow, steady heartbeat of someone who knows exactly what she's protecting. And why? The next morning, I walked into my office, sat down at my desk, and made a decision. If they wanted to escalate this, so be it. But it wouldn't happen on their terms. It would happen on mine. And it wouldn't just be a response. It would be a reckoning. I didn't want revenge. Not in the cinematic sense. What I wanted was control, to stop feeling like the ground could shift beneath me at any moment. The hardest part of a quiet strategy isn't the planning, it's the stillness before it begins. You start noticing how much noise used to fill your life. People who drained you. Obligations you never consented to. Rooms you entered out of habit, not purpose. That morning, I made 3 calls. The first was to my estate attorney. I asked him to review the trust documents one more time, line by line, and identify vulnerabilities. Not legal gaps, he was confident in those, but emotional ones. People, situations, narratives that could be used to destabilize me. He said, "You're thinking like a strategist now." I replied, "I'm thinking like someone who knows what they're up against." The second call was to a forensic accountant. A soft-spoken woman named Yelena, recommended by Iris. Her specialty was tracing financial coercion, particularly in family estates. I gave her access to everything, the business records, the estate logs, digital permissions, even my own spending. I wanted no shadows. If Adam or anyone else had already begun siphoning influence, or funds, there would be a trail. She said, "You're smart to do this now. Before things go public." That word stuck with me, public. Until now, everything had been private. Threats whispered. Documents exchanged behind closed doors. But people like Adam, people who build chaos for leverage, they don't stay in the dark forever. Eventually they want spectacle. And I wouldn't give it to him. The third call was to Iris. Not for advice. Just for a voice I trusted. She didn't say much, just that she was proud of me. That it was okay to feel exhausted. That being strong didn't mean being numb. That night, I started writing everything down. Not for legal use. For myself. I created a document, password protected, titled The Turning. It wasn't a diary. It was a map. Dates. Messages. Conversations. Emotional responses. I documented everything with precision, how I felt before, what changed, how I responded. Because I needed clarity. And because if this storm pulled me under, I wanted to leave a trail of truth behind. The following week, Yelena found something. 3 months before my grandfather died, a bank account under the business's umbrella had been accessed from an unfamiliar IP address. A request to transfer a small amount, nothing that would raise alarms. But the pattern repeated. Small draws. Consistent. Disguised as vendor reimbursements. They totaled just under $48,000. Enough to hurt. Enough to prove intent. And they matched the exact timeline of Adam's sudden new car. The one he claimed was a gift from his girlfriend's family. I added it to the file. No emotion. Just evidence. Meanwhile, my mother had gone quiet. No texts. No calls. A vacuum where guilt used to be. I knew better than to think it meant she'd changed her mind. Silence was her favorite weapon. And absence could be strategic. Then one afternoon, I came home to find a box on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name. Block letters. Inside was a stack of old photographs. Family ones. Me, Adam, our mother, our grandfather. Carefully chosen moments. Smiles, birthdays, holidays. All placed loosely in a box that smelled faintly of cedar and dust. And on top, a note in my mother's handwriting. You're breaking the family apart. It wasn't signed. I didn't cry. But I stood there for a long time, holding that note like it was an X-ray of her heart. She still believed this was about betrayal. She couldn't see it was about survival. That night, I called my attorney again. I said, I want to initiate a protective clause. He replied, that will escalate things. I said, they already did. He began the paperwork the next morning. The clause would solidify asset protections for the next 6 months, locking access, preventing disbursement, and requiring court intervention for any contested claims. It was legal insulation. But more than that, it was a declaration. I would not be intimidated. And I would not negotiate with people who mistook my silence for surrender. 2 days later, I was served. A formal petition for contestation of the will, filed by Adam. The claim was thin. Emotional manipulation, undue influence, capacity concerns. All textbook. All easily disproven. But I knew the real damage wouldn't be legal. It would be reputational. Adam wanted a courtroom. He wanted a story. I wasn't going to give him either. So I hired a crisis consultant. A woman named Alina with a voice like winter steel and eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed my digital presence, flagged anything vulnerable, and drafted a quiet plan of communication for allies, business partners, associates, even distant relatives who might be pulled in. She said, control the narrative before someone else does. I nodded. Because control, at this point, was all I had left that still felt like mine. The week after, I met with Iris at a cafe near the river. We sat outside, coats wrapped tight, steam rising from our mugs. She looked at me and said, "You're different." "How?" "Sharper," she said. "But tired." I looked out at the water, slow and heavy. "I don't want to win," I said. "I just want to stop bleeding." She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "That's what winning is sometimes," she said. "Not losing yourself." The court hearing was set for January. I marked it in my calendar in red. And I gave myself 1 week to rest before everything changed. But rest, I've learned, is a strange thing when you're under siege. It doesn't come from stillness. It comes from knowing your next move before they make theirs. So I spent my evenings walking the same route my grandfather used to take in the woods behind his house. I'd walk until my feet ached, then sit on the old bench he built from reclaimed wood. I'd close my eyes and listen, to wind, to breath, to memory. And in that silence I made peace with something. There was no going back. Not to the family I once believed in. Not to the girl who just wanted to be understood. There was only forward now. Only what I chose to build from the pieces they left behind. And as the first snow began to fall, soft, unhurried, I knew what I would do next. They say court is where truth comes to light. But in my family, the truth has always been buried beneath performance. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. It smelled faintly of paper and floor wax, with high ceilings and worn wooden pews that creaked when you sat down too quickly. I arrived early. Not because I was eager, but because I needed to sit in the silence before the theater began. My attorney, Mr. Levin, adjusted his cuffs and leaned toward me. He said, "Adam's team filed another brief last night. They're claiming Harold had signs of dementia." I replied, "He passed his capacity evaluation 6 months before he died. Signed by 2 doctors. That's on record." He nodded. "It's not about truth. It's about pressure." That part, I already knew. Adam walked in just before the judge arrived, flanked by his lawyer and that same girlfriend who'd emailed me months ago. She wore a tight smile, heavy eyeliner, and a gold bracelet I recognized. It used to belong to our grandfather's second wife. The one he'd given to my mother before their falling out. I wondered what story Adam had told her about it. About me. Our mother didn't come. Neither did any of the cousins. This wasn't a spectacle worth attending. Not yet. The hearing was procedural. The judge, a stern woman with a kind voice, reviewed the preliminary claims and asked questions that felt more like strategy checks than genuine inquiry. Adam sat stiffly, hands clasped, as his lawyer described me as unfairly favored, potentially coercive, and emotionally manipulative under the guise of caretaking. I didn't flinch. I'd read the brief. I knew the language. What I wasn't prepared for was how calm I felt. How separate. Like I was observing it all from behind glass. When it was our turn, Mr. Levin kept it simple. Logical. Unemotional. He presented the documents, the notarized trust, the recorded statements, the video of my grandfather's final revisions to the estate, made in the presence of witnesses and reviewed by his medical team. It was airtight. And yet, when the judge paused and looked at me directly, I knew this wasn't about documents anymore. She said, "Ms. Harper, do you believe your grandfather was of sound mind when he finalized these arrangements?" I looked her in the eye. I said, "Yes." He was clear, intentional, and prepared for exactly this reaction. She nodded once. Then turned back to her screen. After the session adjourned, Adam stood near the door, speaking to his attorney in hushed tones. His girlfriend avoided my gaze. But he didn't. He looked directly at me and smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly. Just patient. Like he believed this was only the beginning. Outside, the sky was bruised with snow clouds. Mr. Levin handed me a copy of the court schedule. He said, "They'll drag it out as long as they can. But the documents hold." I replied, "Good. Because I'm not backing down." He looked at me carefully. "Just be prepared. Next hearing, they'll go personal." I nodded. They already have. That night, I went home and opened a file I hadn't touched since the funeral. It contained old letters, birthday cards, scraps of paper my grandfather had written on, quotes, reminders, small notes in his familiar hand. I pulled out one he'd written when I was 16. A simple line. You always knew when to keep quiet. But you also knew when not to. I slept better than I had in weeks. The following morning, I received a call from Alina, the crisis consultant. She'd found something. Adam's girlfriend had posted a vague but pointed message on social media, one of those "watch who you trust," even family types, tagged with enough breadcrumbs to invite speculation. Within hours, someone from the local business community had emailed me directly, concerned. Damage control was swift. Alina drafted a neutral statement, clarifying the situation and reaffirming the legitimacy of the estate's transition. No emotion. Just facts. She said, stay above it. Don't chase the noise. I followed her advice. But that didn't stop the whispers. An anonymous email arrived later that week, sent to my work address. No name, just text. I hear you're the reason your grandfather died so stressed. You broke him. There was no signature. No traceable IP. Just poison. I didn't delete it. I forwarded it to Mr. Levin and Yelena. Then I added it to my personal record. Because when you're at the center of a quiet war, every thread is evidence. Every manipulation, a footprint. Still, it hurt. Not because it might be true, it wasn't. But because it echoed the thing I feared most, that somewhere, deep down, I had let him down by surviving him. I spent that evening walking through the city. Past the old bookstore he used to take me to. Past the garden center where we'd picked out lavender for his porch. Everything reminded me of how deeply he'd shaped me. How much he'd trusted me to carry something forward. Not the money. The values. The work ethic. The refusal to yield to intimidation. By the time I returned home, I felt steadier. Until I checked my voicemail. A message from my mother. Her voice was thin. Flat. I hope you're happy. You've turned this into a circus. He's your brother, Claire. Family matters more than money. I deleted it. Because no, family doesn't matter more than money. Not when family is the name they used to steal from you. Not when it's a leash they tighten every time you try to breathe. The final straw came the next morning. A certified letter, hand-delivered to my office. A notice of intent. Adam was suing for business damages, claiming my control over the estate was actively harming the company. He'd attached 3 fabricated complaints from vendors. Ones I immediately disproved with a single phone call. But the damage wasn't the content. It was the escalation. He was no longer content with undermining me. He wanted to dismantle me. And that's when I made the final call. To the board of the company my grandfather founded. I scheduled an emergency shareholders meeting. Not to defend myself. But to strip Adam of any remaining influence. The vote would be held in 2 weeks. I knew I had the majority. But I also knew Adam wouldn't go quietly. He never had. Still, as I reviewed the minutes from past meetings, pages marked with my grandfather's annotations and steady ink, I knew what I needed to do. Not punish. Not retaliate. Just protect. The way he taught me. I looked out at the sky that night, dark and heavy with snow again. And I whispered the words I'd been holding back since the day this all began. Enough. Some endings don't come with fire. They arrive like frost, slow, silent, and undeniable. The shareholders' meeting was held in the same conference room where my grandfather once outlined a decade-long growth strategy with nothing but a pen and a whiteboard. I remember standing outside that glass door when I was 17, listening through the crack like it was church. He never raised his voice. Never needed to. That day, I walked into that same room with my spine straight, a folder in hand, and a decision already made. The board consisted of 6 people, 2 who'd known my grandfather since his first store, 3 recent appointees from the expansion, and me. Adam, though he technically held shares through our mother's lineage, had no voting rights. He was allowed to attend as a courtesy. He walked in 10 minutes late, as if to prove some unspoken point. His suit was new. His expression, practiced. He nodded to the others. Ignored me completely. I didn't care. Mr. Levin began the meeting with a clear summary of the motion: a vote to revoke Adam's advisory privileges, remove his name from all pending marketing and branding materials, and formally distance him from any operational role in the family business. I presented the evidence. The financial discrepancies. The manufactured vendor complaints. The social media smear attempts. None of it dramatic. Just facts, methodically laid out. Then I sat down and waited. They voted. 5 in favor. 1 abstention. It was done in under 15 minutes. Adam didn't speak until the end. He stood slowly, adjusted his jacket, and looked straight at me. He said, "You're burning this family to the ground." I replied, "I'm finally keeping the fire where it belongs." He left without another word. The board thanked me quietly. No applause. No handshakes. Just nods that meant, it's over. But it wasn't, not really. Because the fallout came in fragments. The next day, my mother emailed a list of family heirlooms she believed I should return. Old silverware. A grandfather clock. An oil painting that once hung in the front hallway. She said, those weren't part of the estate. They were meant for the family. I replied, they are part of the estate. They were catalogued and appraised 2 years ago. You were at that meeting. No response. 2 nights later, someone left a voicemail from a blocked number, an older man's voice, unfamiliar. He said, "I hope you sleep well knowing what you've done." I forwarded it to Alina. She said, "Block it. Document it. Do not engage." I followed every step. But what no one prepared me for was how quiet my life became. Not peaceful. Just vacant. The silence after years of emotional noise felt unnatural. Like walking through a house after the furniture's been removed. You remember where things used to be, but there's nothing left to sit on. I returned to my routine. Work. Early morning walks. Grocery store aisles where no one knew my name. For the first time in months, I wasn't fighting. I wasn't preparing. I wasn't responding. I was just being. And that, in its own way, was unsettling. I saw Iris once that week. We sat in my living room, drinking tea in slippers and sweatpants. The tension between us had melted over time, replaced by a quiet solidarity that didn't need to be spoken aloud. She looked around my apartment and said, "You've never lived in a place this still before." I nodded. "It's like a museum after closing." She tilted her head. "Maybe it's a studio. Not a museum." That stuck with me. Because maybe this wasn't a monument to what I'd lost. Maybe it was the beginning of what I would build next. That night, I unpacked boxes I hadn't touched since the funeral. Photographs. Ledger books. Even my grandfather's old wristwatch, the one with the cracked leather band and the soft tick that had comforted me as a child when I couldn't sleep. I didn't cry. But I sat with it in my hand for a long time. The following morning, I returned to his house, the one now legally mine, though it still didn't feel that way. The porch light was out. The mailbox still full. I stepped inside slowly. It smelled the same. Pine wood and dust. I walked the halls, room by room. Let my fingers trace the edges of the doorway where my height had been marked in pencil over the years. I stood in the den and stared at the fireplace, at the chair where he used to sit and read the paper, his glasses always sliding down his nose. I whispered, "It's done." Not for him. For me. Then I walked to the study and pulled the list from my coat pocket, the one with all the maintenance tasks, upgrades, and repairs I'd been putting off. I would restore this house. Not for resale. Not for leverage. But for legacy. And in the process, maybe I'd remember what it felt like to create instead of defend. That same week, I received a letter from Adam's lawyer. A formal withdrawal of the petition. No apology. Just bureaucracy. But the meaning was clear. He'd lost. And now, he wanted out quietly. I showed it to Mr. Levin, who scanned it quickly and gave a short nod. He said, "We'll file a response and close it." I asked, "That's it?" He replied, "That's it." But what no one told me, what no lawyer, no consultant, no advisor prepared me for, was how it would feel to win. Because it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing at the top of a hill after climbing for months, only to realize there's no one there to meet you. And that's when it hit me. I'd spent so much time protecting my inheritance, I hadn't thought about how I'd live inside it. The money. The house. The business. All mine now. But so was the silence. So was the grief. And while the threats were gone, the loneliness had only grown louder. I stepped outside that evening, the sky still dusky, the porch cold under my feet. Snow had started to fall again, soft, slow, barely visible. I stood there, breathing in the air that smelled of pine and cold metal, and whispered the words I wasn't sure I was allowed to say out loud. "I miss you." No one answered. But the wind shifted slightly. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel watched. I felt held. Just for a moment. And then the silence returned. Not empty. Just waiting. Some losses don't announce themselves. They dissolve into your life like fog, imperceptible until everything looks different. I started waking earlier. Not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to miss the quietest part of the morning, the one where the world isn't demanding anything yet. Where I could stand barefoot on the hardwood floor, coffee in hand, and feel like the silence was mine again, not something imposed. I'd stopped expecting apologies. From Adam. From my mother. From anyone who once looked at me like I was the problem for protecting what was rightfully mine. There was no closure coming in that form. And strangely, that realization freed me. The legal side of the estate closed quietly. Paperwork was signed. Accounts locked. Adam's petition formally dismissed. The business restructured around a tighter core, leaner and more aligned with what my grandfather had envisioned when he built it. Yelena completed her audit and sent me a final report, a clean slate, she said. No more leaks. No more shadows. I sent her a thank you note. Not an email. An actual card. Because some things still mattered enough to hold. Alina, before signing off, said, "You're going to be fine." I replied, "I think I already am." And I meant it. But healing wasn't a grand moment. It was small. Incremental. It was the first time I laughed again, really laughed, watching some stupid documentary about birds that couldn't land properly. It was the way Iris and I sat on my couch one rainy night, passing a bowl of popcorn back and forth like we were still in college. It was the way I touched the walls of the house each time I passed through a room, grounding myself like it had always belonged to me. Because it did. Not just legally. But spiritually. He built this house with care. With rhythm. Every drawer, every shelf, every door that clicked softly shut. I began restoring it slowly, not to modernize it, but to bring it back to life. Sanded wood. Repainted trim. New light fixtures that still looked old. Each improvement felt like an apology to him, for all the years I doubted my place in his world. The community started noticing. A neighbor dropped off a pie and asked if I was Harold's granddaughter. I said yes. Her eyes softened. She said, "He'd be proud." I stood there at the door a long time after she left, holding the pie like it weighed something other than sugar and flour. By February, the house felt different. Lived in. Settled. One morning, I found myself walking into the den and standing in front of the fireplace, the folder of legal documents still on the mantel. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened the cabinet beneath the bookshelf, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were his old journals. Lined pages. Ink slightly faded. I read one entry aloud. She sees everything, even when she says nothing. That's who will protect this legacy. I closed the book and exhaled. There was no more war to fight. No more case to build. There was just life now. Different. Quieter. But finally mine. Spring came late that year. The garden in the back began to thaw slowly, revealing the stubborn roots of the lavender we planted years ago. I trimmed it back, repotted what I could save, and started fresh with the rest. That became my rhythm. Weed. Water. Replant. No ceremony. Just care. I didn't speak to Adam again. Not because I was angry. But because some fractures aren't meant to be mended. They're meant to be left as they are, a boundary. My mother sent a letter around Easter. No apology. Just a brief note about the past, a vague reference to hurtful things said, and an offer to meet for coffee if I was ready. I didn't respond. Some silences are merciful. Some are necessary. The business stabilized. I didn't take over as CEO. I didn't need to. I appointed someone I trusted, someone who had worked alongside my grandfather with quiet diligence for over a decade. I stayed on the board, handled long-term planning, and let the daily operations run without my shadow looming over them. Iris joked that I was becoming a benevolent ghost. I told her I liked that. Because it meant I could be present without being consumed. I took a short trip alone in April. Nothing grand. Just a coastal town a few hours away, where I walked the cliffs at sunrise and listened to gulls cry over salt air. I brought one of his journals with me. Not to read. Just to hold. On the final morning, I sat on a bench and wrote something of my own. 1 page. Plain ink. I kept the promise. I didn't let them take what you gave me. But I learned something more important. Protecting it wasn't just about keeping it safe. It was about learning how to live inside it, without fear. Without apology. I folded the page and tucked it into the back cover. I didn't need to carry his words anymore. They were already in me. Now, months later, the house is quiet again. But it's no longer the quiet of dread. It's the quiet of completion. Of peace. I bake more now. Small things. Muffins. Scones. I share them with neighbors, with Iris, with the mail carrier who always forgets to wear gloves. I work less. Think more. Sleep deeply. And I find myself smiling for no reason in the middle of the day, because the worst has already happened, and I'm still standing. I don't check blocked numbers anymore. I don't scan crowds for someone who might be watching. I just walk. And breathe. And notice things again. Like how the sun shifts across the kitchen floor at 10:45. Like how lavender doesn't bloom until it's been properly cut back. Like how strength sometimes looks like surrender, but only to people who never learned to carry anything quietly. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd lose half my family, nearly lose my sense of safety, and somehow feel freer than I ever have, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I am. Whole, but not unchanged. Quiet, but not defeated. I may never speak to Adam again. Or my mother. Or the cousins who believed what was easier. That's a loss I've accepted. Because what I gained wasn't just an estate. It was clarity. Boundaries. And a life I'm no longer afraid to live on my own terms. I used to think protecting the legacy meant preserving it exactly as it was. Now I know better. It means carrying it forward. In your hands. Your words. Your choices. And never, ever, handing it over to anyone who mistook your silence for submission. The house creaks now when I walk upstairs. A familiar sound. It doesn't scare me anymore. It reminds me I'm home. And this time, no one gets to take it from me. Not ever again.